April 12th, 2024, a Friday I will never forget. The morning light came through the curtain soft and golden, the kind that makes everything look peaceful. The kettle hissed, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and for the first time in a while I felt calm. I sat at the table scrolling my phone, half smiling at a post about the National Lottery jackpot. It said, 80 million prize unclaimed. I laughed quietly to myself. My husband Daniel was still upstairs, pretending to be asleep even though I knew he could hear every sound. He had been on edge all week, mumbling about bills, about how we never get lucky, about how he was tired of scraping by. So, when he finally came down in his worn-out blue robe and poured himself coffee without saying good morning, I decided to tease him. "Guess what?" I said, with a grin that tried to hide my boredom. "What?" he mumbled. "I won the lottery." He looked up so fast his spoon clattered against the mug. For a second, I saw something in his eyes. Shock, then disbelief, and then a strange flicker of excitement. "Are you serious?" he asked, standing straighter than I'd seen in weeks. "Yeah," I said, sipping my coffee. "I won." I expected him to laugh, to joke back, to say something like, "Sure, and I just bought a castle." But he didn't. Instead, he froze. His eyes narrowed, scanning my face, searching for any sign of a lie. "Show me the ticket," he said. Those 4 words changed everything. At first, I laughed. "Relax, Danny, I was just kidding." But he didn't laugh. He put his mug down slowly and said again, quieter but sharper, "Show me the ticket." I felt my heart squeeze. It was the tone he used when he was about to start an argument, the same cold, heavy tone he used the night he accused me of hiding money because I'd saved $60 for my sister's birthday gift. "Daniel," I said softly, "it was a joke." He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine. "You're serious, aren't you? You bought a ticket and now you're lying about it." "I'm not," I whispered. But he didn't believe me. Within minutes, he began searching. First the kitchen drawers, then my handbag, then the coat pocket hanging by the door. I just stood there, stunned, watching this man I'd been married to for 11 years, tearing through our small home like a detective chasing a criminal. He didn't look at me once. He didn't ask kindly. He didn't smile. That's when I realized it wasn't about the ticket. It was about him. For years, we had lived quietly, no luxury, but enough to get by. I worked part-time at the library. He ran a small repair business that barely survived winter months. We argued sometimes about money, but I thought that was normal. I thought he loved me for who I was, not for what I owned. That morning made me question everything. He searched the trash, the washing machine, even the oven. When he couldn't find anything, he turned to me and said, "Where did you put it?" "I told you, it was a joke," I said, my voice trembling. He grabbed my purse off the table, dumped it on the floor, and started going through every card, every receipt. My hands were shaking. "Daniel, stop, you're scaring me." But he didn't stop. Finally, he looked at me again, his face red, eyes wild. "You're lying. You're hiding it because you don't want to share. You think you can take the money and leave me." I stared at him, speechless. Leave him? That idea had never crossed my mind, not until that exact moment. The silence that followed was painful. He dropped my things back on the table, breathing hard. "You've been different lately," he muttered. "You come home late from the library. You're always on your phone. Now this lottery thing. Maybe you really did win. Maybe you're planning to disappear." My lips parted, but no sound came out. I had nothing to defend because I didn't even understand how we had reached this point. I watched him pace the kitchen like a trapped animal, muttering about numbers, luck, betrayal. He wasn't angry because I lied. He was angry because deep down, he wished it were true. He wished I had won. He wished he could take the money and finally live the life he thought he deserved. That realization hit me harder than his words. When he finally left for work, slamming the door so hard the mugs rattled, I sank into the chair and let the quiet swallow me. I thought of the woman I used to be, trusting, gentle, always trying to make peace. And then I thought of the woman I had just met in the reflection of the kitchen window, someone who had just seen her husband's real face. I opened my phone again and looked at the lottery post. $80 million. No winner yet. I smiled bitterly. Maybe I should buy a ticket, I whispered, just to see what happens next. That evening he came home late. No text, no call, just the sound of keys in the lock and heavy footsteps. I could tell by the way he moved that he'd been drinking. Not enough to be sloppy, but enough to let his anger ferment into confidence. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at the dinner I'd made. Instead, he said, "I went to the store near the gas station. They told me someone from our area did buy a winning ticket last week. You sure it wasn't you?" I froze. He leaned closer, his breath hot with whiskey. "If you did," he said, "and you're hiding it, that's fraud. You know that, right? Spouses share assets. The law says half of that's mine." Something broke inside me, not loudly, quietly like the sound of glass cracking before it shatters. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said softly, "You're right, Daniel. If I ever win, it'll be ours." He smiled, satisfied, and sat down to eat. I stared at him across the table, wondering how many other things he saw as ours. My paycheck, my savings, my dreams, my peace. When he went to bed, I stayed in the living room. I opened my notebook and started writing everything down, not because I planned to report him, but because I wanted to remember this day exactly as it was. The morning that began with a joke and ended with a truth I could never unsee. At 2 a.m., I heard his phone buzz. The screen lit up on the table beside the couch. A message from someone named Clara. "Don't worry, he won't suspect a thing. Just keep her calm until next week." My blood ran cold. I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't make sense until they did. He wasn't paranoid because I lied. He was paranoid because he was lying. Clara. The name meant nothing to me, yet everything at once. I didn't touch his phone again. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and lay next to him in the dark. I could hear his soft snoring, the same sound I used to find comforting. Now it made my skin crawl. I whispered into the dark, so quietly that even I could barely hear it. Maybe I really should buy a ticket. Because now the idea didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. But it wasn't love, and it wasn't luck. It was freedom, waiting to be claimed. The next morning, the sun rose like nothing had happened, but I felt different. Awake in a way I hadn't been for years. The smell of coffee no longer meant comfort. It meant control. For 11 years, Daniel had controlled every mood, every silence, every joke that went too far. But last night changed something. I had seen the message. Don't worry, he won't suspect a thing. It played in my head on repeat, like a radio I couldn't turn off. I wanted to scream, to throw his phone at him, to ask who Clara was and what he wasn't supposed to suspect. But instead, I smiled. I smiled because now I knew. And knowing meant I had power. The same kind of power he thought he had over me. He came down the stairs humming, acting like the man I'd married, the one who kissed my forehead every morning and said, "You worry too much." I wondered if he kissed her forehead too. "Morning," he said, pretending the fight never happened. "Sorry about yesterday. I guess I overreacted." "Guess so," I replied, pouring him coffee without sugar. He always wanted 2 spoons, but I wasn't in the mood to sweeten anything. He sat across from me and said, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking about the lottery," I said, watching his reaction. He smiled. "Still daydreaming, huh?" "Maybe," I said. And then before I could stop myself, I added, "But what if I actually did win? What would you do first?" He froze mid-sip. I saw his brain start spinning again, like a machine that had been oiled overnight. Well, he said slowly, I'd pay off our debts, then maybe buy that house near the lake. You love the lake, right? He said it in a soft voice, as if he was trying to remind me he still cared. But his eyes were already far away, imagining the money, imagining what he'd buy, how he'd live. He wasn't thinking about us. He was thinking about himself with money. That's when the idea came to me. If he wanted a ticket so badly, I'd give him one. After he left for work, I went downtown to the little convenience store near the library. The man behind the counter recognized me. "You're here early," he said, handing me my usual coffee. "Something new today," I replied. "I'd like to buy a lottery ticket." He smiled. "Big dreams, huh?" "Something like that." I bought 3. 1 real, 2 old ones from previous draws that I'd found in my coat pocket from months ago. I folded them carefully and slipped them into an envelope. That evening, when Daniel came home, I greeted him with a calmness he didn't deserve. Dinner was ready. Lights were dim. The radio played quietly. I looked like a woman in love, not a woman building a quiet storm. "I bought a ticket," I said casually as we sat down. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" I thought, maybe I'd try my luck after all. He stared at me, eyes narrow. "You're serious?" "Yes." And that was it. His entire energy shifted. He put the fork down, reached across the table, and held my hand. For the first time in months. "That's amazing," he said softly. "Maybe it's a sign, things turning around for us." For us. That word hit differently now. Over the next few days, he became strangely kind. He made breakfast once, cleaned the kitchen, even brought me flowers from the store. But every time he smiled, it felt rehearsed. A smile you put on when you're waiting for a prize to be announced. I kept the envelope hidden in the drawer under my clothes, knowing he'd look for it anyway. And he did. Twice I caught him accidentally tidying my dresser when I walked in. His eyes flickered with guilt each time. On the 4th night, I pretended to be asleep and heard him get up quietly. The floor creaked as he moved around, opening drawers. I didn't move. I wanted to see how far he'd go. He found the envelope. I heard the soft crinkle of paper, the pause as he took it out, then silence. I opened my eyes slightly, just enough to see him holding the ticket against the dim light from the hallway. He didn't even bother whispering. He just mouthed the words. I knew it. He took a photo of it on his phone, then carefully put it back, thinking I hadn't noticed. The next morning, he kissed my cheek before leaving for work. "Love you," he said with a voice too smooth to be real. That's when I decided. If he wanted a story about winning, I'd give him the ending he deserved. That weekend, I went to the lottery office. The clerk checked the ticket. "Sorry," she said kindly. "This one's from March. Not valid anymore." Perfect. I went home with a small grin. The old ticket was my weapon now. That night, I waited until dinner to drop the line. I said, staring at the TV, "they just announced the winner from our town." He looked up instantly. "What?" "Yeah," I said, pretending to be nervous. "I think it might be me." He nearly dropped his plate. "Let me see." I hesitated. "Promise you won't freak out?" He nodded like a child waiting for a Christmas gift. I walked to the bedroom, took the envelope, and handed it to him. He opened it with shaking hands, scanning the numbers. Then he gasped, "These match! Oh my God, these match!" He was jumping, laughing, grabbing me by the arms. "Do you understand what this means? We're rich. We're finally free." I nodded, keeping my face calm. "Free," I said softly. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept making plans, a new car, a house in Spain, quitting his job, starting a business. I listened quietly, memorizing every selfish sentence. Not once did he say we, not once did he ask what I wanted. At 3 a.m., he went to the kitchen, probably to open a beer. I took his phone from the table. It was unlocked. I scrolled to Clara's messages. There they were, dozens of them. Clara. Once you get the money, you know what to do. Daniel. Of course, she's clueless. I'll say I'm investing it for both of us. Clara. Good. Then we can finally move to Lisbon. Lisbon. The word burned in my chest. He had planned it all. To take the fake ticket, cash it in, and disappear with her. I put the phone down and went back to bed before he returned. I closed my eyes and waited for morning. My heart didn't hurt anymore. It was too full of quiet, sharp purpose. The next day, I acted like nothing had changed. He kissed me goodbye. I smiled and said, "Good luck today." After he left, I made 2 phone calls, one to the lottery office and one to my lawyer. The first confirmed again that the ticket was worthless. The second helped me move half our joint savings into a private account I'd opened years ago, but never used. That evening, Daniel came home radiant, flushed with excitement. "They said I can claim it Monday," he shouted. I blinked. "Really?" "Yes, I sent them the picture and they confirmed it. I told them we'll come together. You and me, baby." He wrapped his arms around me and I almost laughed at the irony. He thought his dream was about to come true. He didn't realize the nightmare waiting for him. Sunday night, he took me out to dinner. The first in years. He ordered expensive wine, steak, dessert. He smiled like the man I once loved. I could almost believe in it again. Almost. When we came home, he went to shower, humming. I opened his phone one last time. "Clara, tomorrow's the big day. Don't mess it up." Daniel. "She has no idea. I'll take care of it before noon." Take care of it. The words turned my stomach. He planned to leave that very day, after using my name, my ticket, my signature. I slept only an hour that night. I kept my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain tapping on the window like a clock, counting down to freedom. When morning came, I got up early, dressed neatly, and put the fake ticket back in the envelope. I handed it to him over breakfast. "You're the lucky one," I said softly. "You can go claim it for us." He smiled wide. "You trust me?" I nodded. "Of course. I always have." He left at 9. At 9:30, I packed my suitcase. I took the documents, the savings, and the photo of my parents from the hallway. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one. At 11 awa, my phone rang. "Where are you?" he shouted. "At peace," I said. "What did you do?" I told them to check the date. There was silence on the line, then the sound of him slamming something hard. "You tricked me." "No," I said calmly. "You tricked yourself. You should have read the fine print." I hung up. As I drove away, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the feeling of release. For 11 years, I had been part of his story. That day, I started writing my own. The ticket was worthless, but the lesson was priceless. The first thing I noticed after leaving was silence, not the kind that makes you uncomfortable, but the kind that makes you feel safe, like the air itself is protecting you. I drove until the city turned into trees, and the streets became narrow ribbons of roads surrounded by green. My heart was still pounding, but every mile between me and Daniel felt like another piece of me coming back to life. I stopped at a small roadside cafe 2 towns away. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes and a cheerful voice, brought me coffee without asking what I wanted. I must have looked like someone who needed it. "You're not from around here, huh?" she asked. I shook my head. Not anymore. I didn't know what my plan was. I didn't have one. But for the first time, that didn't scare me. I checked my phone. 17 missed calls. 10 messages. Daniel. "Where are you?" Daniel. "You think this is funny?" Daniel. "You ruined everything." And finally, the one that made me smile. Daniel. "Clara's gone. She blocked me." I took a sip of coffee, the warmth steadying my hands. He must have shown up at the lottery office, waving that old ticket like a madman, only to have them tell him it was expired. Then, realizing Clara wasn't waiting for him with open arms, only silence. That was the thing about people like him. They always thought they were the smart ones. They planned everything, used everyone, and then blamed luck when their lies fell apart. But luck didn't fail him. His character did. 2 days passed before I stopped shaking whenever my phone buzzed. I stayed at a small motel under a different name. I spent my time walking through quiet streets, reading newspapers in the park, and writing everything that had happened into a notebook. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it so I'd never forget how it felt to wake up free. One morning, I turned on the TV. A local news report flashed across the screen. Man arrested after attempting to claim falsified lottery ticket in Maple County. The reporter described him perfectly. Late 30s, dark hair, wedding rings still on. He had argued with the clerk, insisting his wife gave him permission before they called security. I laughed. Not loudly, but the kind of laugh that comes from deep inside when something unfair finally evens out. He had gone to the office pretending to be my savior and left in handcuffs, exposed by his own greed. I turned the TV off and sat in silence. For the first time, I wasn't angry at him. I pitied him. Because even if I had really won the lottery, he would have found a way to lose it. Through lies, through arrogance, through the emptiness that always followed him. 3 weeks later, I rented a small apartment by the river. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the furniture secondhand, but every corner felt alive. I could breathe without fear of being watched or judged. Every morning, I walked to the market to buy fresh bread and talked with the locals. One woman, Mrs. Caldwell, lived across the hall. She was in her 60s, always wearing bright scarves and smelling faintly of lavender. "You live alone, dear?" she asked one day as we rode the elevator. "Yes," I said, smiling, "and it's wonderful." She laughed softly. "Then you're already richer than most." That sentence stuck with me, because she was right. I used to think being rich meant comfort, the kind that comes from money, things, or promises. But real wealth was waking up without fear, drinking coffee without tension, and smiling without pretending. Still, the world doesn't let you escape easily. One evening, there was a knock on my door. I froze. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there. He looked different, thinner, tired, his eyes hollow. His once confident posture had collapsed into something desperate. He held a small bag in his hand and tried to smile. "Hi," he said softly. I didn't reply. "Can I come in?" "No." He looked around the hallway as if hoping someone would interrupt us, give him an excuse to stay, but there was only silence. I wanted to explain," he said. "Everything got out of hand." I crossed my arms. "You mean when you tried to steal from me?" He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Oh, so the messages with Clara were a misunderstanding." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Clara was she was helping me figure things out." "Helping you move to Lisbon with my imaginary winnings?" I said sharply. His face turned red. "I made a mistake, okay? I was stupid, but I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You just didn't care if you did." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence between us was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, he said, "I lost everything. My job, the business, the apartment. I have nowhere to go." "That's not true," I said. "You can always go back to the person you chose over me." He shook his head. "She's gone. She took what little I had left." And for a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the night he searched my purse, the morning he accused me of lying, the years of quiet disrespect I had accepted as love. I stepped back and said, "Goodbye, Daniel." He looked at me, eyes wet, mouth trembling. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said. "I told you once I won the lottery. Turns out I did, just not the way you think." Then I closed the door. I stood there, leaning against it, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, the kind that comes when you finally do the thing you thought you couldn't. That night, I sat by the window, looking at the city lights reflecting off the water. Each light looked like a tiny heartbeat, pulsing in the dark. I thought about all the women like me, the ones who give and give until there's nothing left but silence, the the ones who believe love means sacrifice. I realized that's how people like Daniel survive. They find hearts that don't know how to stop forgiving. But I was done forgiving. I wrote him one last message. You didn't lose everything. You just lost me. And that's the same thing. Then I blocked his number. Months passed. My life became simple. I got a full-time job at the local library, the same kind of quiet space I'd always loved. The smell of old paper, the sound of turning pages. It felt like peace had a soundtrack. Every Friday, I treated myself to a small lottery ticket, not because I believed in luck, but because it reminded me how my freedom had started, with a joke that turned into truth. Sometimes, at night, I'd imagine what Daniel might be doing. Maybe still chasing quick wins, still blaming fate. Maybe sitting in a bar somewhere, telling people how his wife went crazy after pretending to win the lottery. People like him always find a story that makes them the victim. But I didn't need to correct it. His story was his punishment, always trying to prove he didn't lose. One rainy evening, Mrs. Caldwell knocked on my door with a box of homemade cookies. The building's organizing a charity raffle, she said. You should come. Everyone's buying tickets. I laughed. More tickets? Haven't I tempted fate enough? She smiled. This time, the prize is just a fruit basket. At the event, surrounded by neighbors and laughter, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. When they drew the winning number, it was mine. Everyone cheered, and I laughed so hard I could barely hold the basket. As I walked home under the streetlights, carrying that small prize, I realized it wasn't about luck at all. It was about reclaiming joy, the kind that doesn't come from money, but from knowing you survived what tried to break you. I put the basket on my table, poured myself tea, and whispered, I finally won. Not the lottery, not revenge, but myself. And that was worth more than $80 million could ever buy. The winter that followed was colder than any I could remember, but inside my little apartment, it felt warm. Not because of heating, but because peace had finally moved in. Every morning I'd open the curtains, let the pale light in and tell myself, you made it. People always say freedom feels like flying, but to me it felt like standing. Finally standing still after years of running in emotional circles. One morning, while I was shelving books at the library, a letter arrived addressed to me in handwriting I instantly recognized. Daniel. My chest tightened, but I didn't open it right away. I finished my shift, drank my coffee, walked home through the snow, and only then, when I felt steady, I slit the envelope open. Inside was a single piece of paper and a photo. The paper said, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because you're the only person who ever really saw me. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, the greed, the way I treated you. I lost everything I thought mattered. Money, friends, business, even Clara. Turns out she never cared about me. I thought winning would fix everything, but losing you showed me what I actually destroyed. You don't owe me forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I understand now. Daniel. The photo was of him, sitting on a park bench, holding a paper coffee cup. He looked older, smaller. Not the man I once married, but a ghost of the one I used to love. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my journal. Not to save it out of love, but as proof that closure sometimes arrives not with fireworks, but with a whisper. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the past year, the fights, the fake ticket, the escape, the quiet mornings in my new home. I realized something. Every story has two endings. One that the world sees and one that lives inside you. The world saw a woman trick her greedy husband with a fake lottery ticket. But inside, it wasn't about trickery. It was about survival. People think betrayal is loud, slammed doors, shouted accusations, dramatic exits. But real betrayal is silent. It's when the person you love most starts treating your kindness like a weakness. When your generosity becomes an expectation instead of a gift, when we slowly turns into me. Daniel didn't destroy our marriage with one big lie. He killed it slowly, with everyday selfishness. And me? I let him, until I finally didn't. Months went by, and life began to take on rhythm again. I started a small book club at the library. At first, only 2 women came, Mrs. Caldwell with her lavender scarves, and a younger woman named Nora, who reminded me of myself 10 years earlier, quiet, polite, always saying sorry for things that weren't her fault. Week by week, more people joined. It became our little circle of stories and laughter, where women talked not just about books, but about the things they were too afraid to say elsewhere. About broken marriages, lost dreams, rediscovered hope. One night, after everyone left, Nora stayed behind. She hesitated, then said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "My boyfriend," she said softly, "checks my phone when I sleep. Says it's because he doesn't trust people anymore. He says I should understand." I looked at her and saw a reflection of my younger self sitting at that same kind of table, trying to convince herself that love and fear could live in the same house. I told her the story. Not with names, not with details, just the truth. About a woman who said she won the lottery to test how much her husband really loved her. About how she discovered that sometimes losing someone is the only way to win your life back. When I finished, Nora was quiet. Then she smiled sadly and said, "So what did she do next?" "She bought a new kind of ticket," I said, "one that couldn't be stolen." She laughed through her tears, and for the first time, I saw strength flicker in her eyes. That night, I walked home under a pale moon. The streets were empty, the air sharp with frost. I thought about how strange life is. How one small moment, one harmless joke, can change the entire course of your story. If I hadn't said those words, "I won the lottery," I might still be there, trapped in that kitchen, apologizing for things I didn't do, explaining myself to someone who had already stopped listening. But instead, that sentence became a door, and walking through it had cost me everything, but given me more. I stopped by the river, watching the ice drift slowly downstream. In the reflection, I saw not a victim, not even a survivor, but a woman who had learned her worth the hard way, because the truth is, the biggest lottery you can ever win isn't money. It's realizing you don't need someone else to complete your life. You are already whole. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, the river ran faster, and the trees outside my window began to blossom again. One afternoon, I received another envelope, this one not from Daniel, but from the National Lottery Office. Inside was a promotional letter. "Congratulations! You've been selected to receive a free entry into our anniversary draw." I laughed out loud. The irony was too perfect. I pinned the letter on my fridge as a reminder, not of luck, but of how far I'd come. That week, our book club picked The Great Gatsby. During the discussion, Mrs. Caldwell said something that made everyone nod quietly. Some people chase green lights forever, thinking happiness is something out there, but sometimes it's right where you stop running. That night, I thought about that green light. For years, mine had been Daniel, the dream that someday he'd change, that someday he'd love me the way I loved him. But the truth was, he never could. And I finally stopped waiting at the shore. One Sunday morning, while dusting the shelves, I found the old fake ticket tucked inside a book. I had forgotten I even kept it. The paper had faded, edges worn from being handled too many times. I held it in my hands and smiled. That worthless slip of paper had been my turning point. The moment my story split in two, the life I lived for someone else and the life I started living for me. So I framed it, not as a trophy, but as a promise, to never gamble my peace again for anyone's approval. Later that summer, I took a short trip to the coast. the one I used to dream about visiting with Daniel. The air smelled like salt and freedom. I sat on the beach with a notebook, writing the last chapter of my journal. I wrote, "Once upon a time, I told a lie, and it set me free. I thought I'd lost everything, but in truth, I'd only shed what was never real. Love built on control is not love. Trust built on fear is not trust. The lottery was never money. It was peace, courage, and knowing when to walk away." When the sun began to set, I tore out the page, folded it, and let the wind carry it into the waves. It drifted away slowly, like closure itself, gentle, unstoppable, final. As I watched it disappear, I whispered the words I wished someone had told me years ago. You don't need luck. You just need yourself. I went back to my apartment that night, the smell of the sea still clinging to my hair. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and looked out at the city lights. The same ones that once made me feel small now felt like stars, scattered just for me. My phone buzzed once, a new message from an unknown number. "Hope you're doing okay, D." I looked at it for a long moment, then I deleted it. No anger, no sadness, just peace. Because when you truly move on, you don't need to announce it. You just live it. Weeks later, Nora came by the library with a bright smile. "I broke up with him," she said. "I moved in with my cousin. I feel free." I hugged her tightly. "You bought your ticket," I whispered. She laughed. "Guess I did." And as she walked away, I realized that maybe that was my real win. Not escaping Daniel, but helping someone else escape their own. Maybe that's what we're all meant to do. Take our broken stories and turn them into maps for others to find their way out. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, and you're still holding on to someone who makes you feel small, remember this. You don't have to wait for luck. You don't have to wait for someone to change. You don't have to win a lottery to start over. You just have to stop believing you're trapped. Because the moment you decide to choose yourself, that's when you've already won. And that, my dear, is the only jackpot that never runs out. End of script. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. View my videos.